Welcome everyone, good evening. Hopefully you can all hear me. Welcome to this evening's Avanti Nights. This is part of our family wellbeing series, and I'm very excited to present to you shortly an amazing speaker whom I've had the privilege of learning some stuff from before, so 5,000 other people. So I'm very excited, but just to introduce you what we're doing, Avanti Nights Family Wellbeing Series is an opportunity for us from the Avanti Schools Trust to share some of the wisdom and values that we try to abide by and live for to the greater audience. We have had a psychologist, Dr. Chetna Kang, speak last month, and then a couple of weeks ago we had Niti Sheth speak about how is your gut feeling, so about the tips of Ayurveda, ancient wisdom of cooking and medicine, how we can have holistic meals that care for the tummies of our children. Now today, especially in today's society and the climate that we're living in right now, everyone is, as parents, we're all concerned, are our children's going to become the best that they can be? There's lots of talk on social media and the world of people finding their passion, their purpose. But what type of contribution are our children going to be making the world that they're going to grow up in? We can always moan very easily about the world that we do live in, but it's going to be our future, our children that are going to make it or break it for the future. So let's go over and let me start introducing our speaker, who's going to be talking about cultivating compassionate citizens. So let's introduce Dr. James Biddulph. He's a doctorate from the University of Cambridge, where he is the founding head teacher of the first uni research school in the UK at the University of Cambridge Primary School. He has taught and led in 5 schools over a career of 20 years, impacting on at least 5,000 children. And I thought I had a hard job raising my one son. He was outstanding new teacher of the year and became an advanced skills teacher working in primary and secondary schools in East London. He led 2 failing schools to provide good education. His work also took him to Namibia and South Africa, working with children in developing health education, focused on educating communities about HIV. He is involved in training new teachers at Cambridge, and he is a founding fellow of the Royal Charter College of Teachers. Prior to his teaching training, he worked in Nepal, where he taught in remote schools. Education is clearly his passion from his biography that you've heard so far. He loves to find ways to support every child. His school has received outstanding reviews. He's initiated a new series of 6 books called Unlocking Research to be published in July 2020. He is the series editor. So go online, find out more about this series and about him. He's a living legend amongst me and my friends. We love James. He was telling me yesterday the story of his lovely dog. He's just got a lot of love, a lot of compassion in him. And to think that our children probably spend most of their waking life at school, and he's responsible for the teachers that influence our children, is somebody we should be making sure both our ears are tuned in. Put the Hoover down, put the forks and knives down, get your ears open, and let me welcome on James.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. And as this was marketed as a well-being event, I hope that this is better for your well-being than being sitting in your garden or somewhere nicer in the sunshine. So I'll do my very best to make it entertaining. I'm going to share my screen in a moment, but I'm hoping that we could, although we're not in the same room and interactivity is limited, I hope there's a chance for us to have it a bit more dynamic. So I'm going to be inviting you to talk with whoever you're sitting next to with a number of questions as we move through this short presentation. I'm going to just share my screen and then we will begin. So the whole notion of nurturing compassionate citizenship, which is at the core of the school where I work at the moment, we're also talking about relationships. Everything is about relationships within a school community, as it is in society. So the next 40 minutes or so, as well as asking you to take part and talk with the people next to you, and to share with the chat function, the real aims is to develop a sense of awareness of self related to parenting, also to explore how values are lived out, and to understand what compassionate communication might be. I mean, it's important to say that in lockdown, it's been particularly challenging, not only for teachers, but as the head teacher of a school of 500 children, it's, to acknowledge how complex it is for parents who are, as well as working and trying to keep their homes going, are also now having to teach or facilitate learning via the schools. It's hugely complex, and that word complexity will come up again and again in what I'm going to be talking about, as is judgment. So no teacher wakes up in the morning thinking I'm going to be a bad teacher today, and no parent wakes up thinking today I'm going to be a bad parent. And yet there's so much judgment about both those professions, the parent and the teacher. So Maya Angelou, the great poet, said, just do your best, and when you know better, make that your new best. And that's how the culture in which we try to create in my school, and the culture we try to live out with our children. There's lots of judgment about what you should do, what you shouldn't do, whether you're good or bad at something. And there's so many other words around that. So we're going to try and work on some of that judgment language as well through this presentation. It's really only an introduction and some insights that I've gathered over the years of working with a number of children from East London, now in Cambridge. And I hope it's useful to you, and that being in the garden wasn't a better place to be. So a few myths really to bust. I don't know if you've been watching this on Channel 4. I think it's a kind of really unhelpful program. It's called Britain's Best Parent. I think the question mark is correct, because the whole notion of that program I would challenge. What is a good parent? What is the best parent? And why are they putting us in competition with one another? Because again, the word complex will come up again. It's such a complex thing, nurturing a child within your family home, but also within the school context. I think the title of this program, which basically is setting up different families to say which is the best parent, is a flawed program, because you can't actually work out what a best parent is, because every child is so unique and every family context is so unique. I think it should just be called Some of Britain's Parents, but that wouldn't sell very well probably, and it wouldn't get the ratings. Because when we're dealing with children, we're dealing with humans, it's a messy business. And in my view, we need to find ways to understand our own responses to the challenges that we come across within a school context, within a family context, rather than looking at programs like this where we're constantly judged as being good or not good enough. So that's where my starting point. This is not a place of judgment, and I hope you don't take away any judgment, but maybe some new insights. So this is a blob tree. Now, your children in their schools may have used these. The blob trees are quite useful. So just whoever you're with, or if you're by yourself, where, rather than kind of analysing what kind of parent you are at the moment, whereabouts would you place yourself in your parenting at the moment, or if you're an educator, as an educator? Sometimes it feels, if you look at the top of the pink one, sometimes it feels as if you're climbing off the picture because you're fed up with all of it and you don't really want to be involved anymore. Or maybe you're balancing arm in arm, sitting on that little bench halfway up the tree. Or maybe at the bottom, about to light the fire of that ladder to help somebody else fall off, maybe it's in a judgment mode. So just consider, where are you as a parent? And importantly, to know that as a teacher, as a parent, we experience all those different aspects of that blob tree, of different people on that blob tree. There is no perfect parent, there's no perfect teacher. We're all struggling to find the very best way for all our children. And if you look on the internet, there's lots of useful examples of blob trees that you can use with children to help them express how they're feeling, express how they are in their school day. I don't know if you ask your children regularly, what did you do at school today? They would probably say nothing. And if you said, what did you eat today? They'd probably say nothing. And those two things bring in dread and fear in parents about what's going on at school. But maybe using something like this might help bring out some more discussion at home. So the word complexity is one I started with. Um, if we stand back, just imagine this is you as a parent. And I want to just mention the diversity of families in a moment. But let's stand back. This is you as a parent. Now, you would have grown up with parents or some kind of parenting, and you had experiences of growing up, either positive or negative or indifferent. And if you are a parent with another parent, so you're not a single parent, but you're living with somebody else, and you have a partner who's also the parent, they have their own experiences of growing up. There lies the first challenge of understanding what parenting is like for you and your family. There's one, or there are two people, or a grandparent as well. Then you have what society says a parent should be. Again, another complexity. So we're beginning to nudge towards how complex what it is you're doing as parents and what we do as educators. Then you've got what other parents say. And if you're in a WhatsApp group, there's probably hundreds of people, what other parents think and say. And so there's a constant stream of judging yourselves against other people. And then there is, all those different people's experiences growing up. So there's another layer of complexity. And then if your parents are like my parent, they've got an opinion about everything. So there's our parents' opinions, and then your partner. So if you live with a partner, your partner's parents' experiences and points of view. It's very, very complex growing up, and it's very complex being a parent trying to nurture children into growing into the people that you want them to be. And then in all this mix is the young person who is struggling to make sense of this very complex world, especially in a world that is in lockdown, where you're not allowed to hug people. And I've heard of stories where you go to school and there are lines on the floor and you can't cross the magic line. What does that do to our children? So I just want to really add my kind of call to arms to stop judging ourselves against other people, but really to look at the child in front of us and try and work out what they need in every moment. So, these questions are important. When you have children, what are your hopes for your children? In schools, we create structures and we create visions about what we want our schools to be like for our children. But when you have your own children, you'll be asking yourselves, maybe not outright, but what are your hopes for your children? And what happens to your hopes when your child doesn't match the hopes you originally had? And how can we support one another with a new vision for your child? So just with the first question, with the people that you might be sitting with, or if you're by yourself, how would you respond to that first question? What are your hopes for your children or for your child? There should be some mood music happening any minute. You've got a minute to reflect on that. What are your hopes for your children? And kind of dig deep. If there's no mood music, then I won't sing, but you've got a minute there and I'll just pause here. That was, I think, enough. Oh, the mood music's going, but if you are chatting online, I'm sure somebody will share those with you. But it's very, when you have a child, you have hopes and dreams and passions for your child, and then your child evolves into a human being with their own passions and hopes and desires, and sometimes they don't meet. So how do we work through those, senses of disappointment that your hopes and dreams have to realign and think differently? Well, rather than going to social media and asking WhatsApp or Twitter what they think, and there's a number of pieces of research looked at the styles of interaction between parents, which we've adopted now in schools as well. The first one, if you have a look, is about authoritative parenting or relationships that are authoritative. The second one is broadly about authoritarian, where authority is really and power and agency is really held in the adult's hands. Whereas the first one is slightly different. It's providing an authoritative approach. And then the last one is the permissive or not really, or showing disinterest, a permissive approach where the child has to try and make sense of the world purely by themselves. Now, what the research very clearly indicated is that authoritative parenting, authoritative relationships, as opposed to authoritarian, permissive, or uninvolved styles, they lead to the most positive outcomes for the child. So David Whitebread and Penny Coltman, who have both worked at the university, recently retired, I'll just read what they said about authoritative parents. They are the parents that are most emotionally warm and affectionate towards their children. In addition, they also set clear and consistent standards for their children's behavior. They convey those high expectations to their children. They demonstrate also clear respect for the child's need for autonomy and independence. And they should support the child's adherence to the standards. So they celebrate when children are meeting the standards that have been discussed and agreed as a family, as a parenting. And this style has been shown to support children's developing self-efficacy and self-regulation. And importantly, they become successful learners because of authoritative parenting compared with authoritarian and permissive styles of parenting. So a question really is, what kind of language do we use when your children are not doing what you want them to do? What language do they use when they do something you don't want them to do? And how do you respond in an authoritative way? So again, on the chat, if you can discuss with somebody next to you or think for yourselves, what kinds of language do you use? If there's any mood music in the background, that will be great. Some of the language may be like this. They're playing up, or they're disobeying me, or they're defiant, they're rude, disrespectful, they're not thinking about others, they're not taking responsibility, a tantrum, they're messing around. And then with all these words, we need to explore in depth about what does it mean for a 4-year-old to take responsibility or to think about other people? How does a 4-year-old start to understand what it means to think about other people or to show respect? What does a tantrum really mean? What does messing around mean? So beneath the language, it can be quickly judgmental, especially in the cultures that we've grown up in as being largely judgmental of being good or bad. That trying to delve beneath some of the behaviors that we see is an important way to change the language we use with our young people, because what we do know is that if you talk about you're playing up, children will become expert player-uppers. Or if you use the language in my child's being defiant, or that child is defiant, the child will become an expert at being defiant, because we're labeling and using that language to express how they are. So I don't know if you might have seen this triangle. It's called the drama triangle. It comes from the fight, flight, and the third one, the run language of being a human. So the top left is about persecutor, then a rescuer, and a victim. Now, often the child can be in victim. They feel blameless. Why did you tell me to tidy my room? You're just making me ruin my life because I'm not being able to play. The parent then becomes the role of persecutor. Or if there are two people in a family, in a parenting role, maybe one becomes the persecutor and one becomes the rescuer. Mum won't let me have any more chocolate, but dad rescues me by saying, you can have chocolate if you tidy up your Lego. So this dynamic is well regarded, I think, in the psychological world. And I'm not a psychologist, so and there's been many more people who are more expert than I am. But we can see this play out quite interestingly in classrooms sometimes, where the children become victim and the adults become persecutor or rescuers. So it is really unhelpful, this triangle, because we don't want anyone to be a victim or a persecutor, and the role of rescuer can be problematic as well. because what it does do is children start then relying on the rescuer to solve everything in their lives, rather than building the self-efficacy and self-reliance and resilience to manage the world around them, which, as we know, is increasingly complex. So rather than persecutor, rescuer, and victim, we can start exploring language of being assertive. So as an authoritative parenting, being assertive means you're just asserting what the boundaries are. It doesn't mean you're not caring or that you're persecuting, but you are asserting the wisdom that you have as a parent, as an adult, to say, these are the boundaries that we've agreed to, and we're not moving beyond these boundaries. The rescuer can acknowledge and be caring, but is not rescuing, because they're acknowledging the vulnerability of the child. They're not going to see the child as a victim. So to say, and we'll talk about how we might do that later on in this presentation. So moving away from persecutor, victim, and rescuer to assertive, caring, and vulnerable. And that really is moving towards this notion of adult. How do we respond to situations with our child that doesn't push us into this persecutor, rescuer, victim model, but it's really thinking about us as adults responding in an assertive, caring, and acknowledging the vulnerability of a child. I was fortunate enough to do some doctorate research, not in the school, but in children's family homes. And it was about creative learning. And what I noticed is that when parents give space to their children, where they, when they don't timetable every minute of the day for their child at home, when they provide resources for them to be creative, the parent becomes the resource giver. And when you step back and you know when to step forward to help, when you let children use their own time and they make their own time plans up, then these things in the middle, children becoming resourceful, playful, curious, more imaginative, more self-determined, more risk-taking, thinking more about possibilities, seem to evolve than when parents were occupying all the space and the time with their children. So that giving space, not timetabling every moment, providing those resources, stepping back, knowing when to step forward, letting them make mistakes, letting them, this important one, let them struggle with uncertainty. It's very easy as adults, because we know the answers to some things, to step in too quickly and not let your children or our children struggle with uncertainty. So it created an enabling space. The children that I found to be most creative were the ones where the parents stood back and created an enabling space in the home. So, as was said at the beginning of the presentation, what do we want society to be like? Schools and parents have a symbiotic relationship in trying to nurture the society of the future. So what do we want our society to be like? So again, just with people next to you, or if you're by yourself, what do we want society to be like? Just have a 30 seconds, think about that. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thanks. Kush, I don't know if there's anyone coming up with some ideas on the chat function.
Yep, James, we have some questions coming in.
Should we pause here for some questions?
Yeah, sure. James, fascinating points raised already, especially the thought-provoking question of what do you want them to be in the future? We kind of label it as a profession, but in terms of what is in character, that can easily slip out of our vision. So yeah, there's a few questions, so let me crack on. Can you hear me, James? Yeah?
I can hear you.
Okay, fine. First one is, what is when kids push against boundaries that are set continuously for 20 or 30 minutes? So not that, the initial, no, don't do that, you're not allowed to do that, but then they just carry on and on and on and on. From a schooling point of view, we generally feel that our kids are better behaved and adherent at school than they are at home because of familiarity. What do you guys do at school, and what can we adopt from that to take back at home?
Well, I think that the first point is that the relationship between parents and child is very different from the teacher relationship in the school, where the children want to, typically children want to behave to kind of meet the need of the teacher. It's curious that that they want to impress the people in their schools, whereas they don't need to impress the parents as much because you're kind of an ongoing factor in their life, and they know that you love them, and they can push further and more with you. So so the relationship is different. And obviously we've got 30 in a classroom, I've got 500 in a school, you've got 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe 4 or maybe 5 children. It's again very different. So when children are pushing the boundaries, that is a judgment that they are being defiant, essentially, or they're not listening to the parent. If we go to what they really need, what is it they're needing? Do they need more control? Do they need more ownership of their space and time? Do they understand why they can't? Do they really understand why they can't do what you've asked them not to do? So we're going to talk about, near the end of this presentation, some examples about how you might approach that with a different language tool. But it's about reframing. They're pushing the boundaries. Why are they doing that? It's not because they just fancy annoying you, or they don't want to please you. It's for some other reason. Typically, again, the word complexity comes up again and again and again.
Yeah, exactly. Another one here, James. What is the role of school and teachers in helping to raise our children? We as parents can often fall into the trap, oh, they're just teaching them things. It's the syllabus stuff. But like, do you as a head teacher set out an agenda in terms of character formation for our children?
Yeah, so we in our school and in many schools, and as are in the Avanti schools, there are a set of values that we are saying are important for the betterment of society. So it goes to this question: what do you want society to be like? So those values you can't just say to somebody, show empathy. You've got to model it. You've got to get beneath what being empathetic looks like. Another value in our school is being courageous. So if you want children to be courageous, you have to put them in places where they are going to be out of their comfort zone. They have to be in spaces of uncertainty for them to be courageous. Otherwise, you can talk about being courageous. Unless they experience it and start living it, they're not going to. So to answer your question, I think, as you said at the beginning, schools, children spend a lot of hours at school, and teachers care deeply about children, and the children want to do well for their teachers, as well as for themselves. So there is a special place in school for us to be able to nurture and raise further up the agenda that values are important. And unfortunately, in schools, everyone's got an opinion because everyone's been to school, and the second thing is, people often polarize. They either say it's academic or it's values led. It's either creative or it's performance. And to be honest, all that is problematic and denies the complexity of what it means to grow up as a human being and to live as a human being and to be in a community, in my school case, of 500 people, plus the adults, plus the parents. So I think schools have an important place to play. I think teachers, I've heard from many parents saying they didn't know how difficult it was to be a teacher. Now their children are in lockdown at home. They didn't realize how complex it is. So maybe there's a different discourse going forward, or a different relationship between parents and teachers to really answer this question: what do we want society to be like?
100% agree with the last bit. Our appreciation and gratitude and amazement of what teachers do day in and day out, having had our kids at home and trying to homeschool them, I mean, is phenomenal. And I'm a dentist. My patients, they're all going back into work, and they're loving being back at work, because it's a hard task to keep the kids entertained, keep them creative, keep them keep the values nurturing. It's easy just to get annoyed and shout and stuff. Final question, James, before I let you carry on, is how do we find a balance between setting boundaries, our conditioning, and protecting our children from harm? So you gave the example of courage. And I remember when we spoke one time, you were talking about a kid on a bike and the scenario of when they fall off and the kid's like naughty ground versus, okay, get up and just carry on. These things happen. Like I can say as a parent, I want to try and protect my child from going into harm. I want to push him so that he explores stuff. I want to, but then I also have my conditioning of, I'm scared of dogs because I got bit twice. So then we don't necessarily go to the park to ride a bike. So how do we combine our conditioning, our protective nature versus wanting them to explore and be creative?
Well, thank you, first of all, for being so honest about your own experiences, because it's not easy, really, because the first thing as a parent, as an adult, I have a legal duty of care for children, that we need to protect them from harm, of all kinds of harm. So as you say, it's a judgment call, knowing your child. So what's good for your child, and the boundaries that you can push a little bit with them, with your son, is different from another child in a school. My nieces, it's going to be different in each case, and the parents will understand what their child can do. However, parents sometimes and adults sometimes underestimate what children can do. I don't know what the exact statistic is, but most of the climbing frame, when children are on climbing frames, when there's accidents, it's normally, and we were told this at teacher training, it's normally when adults go to try and help them unravel from the climbing net. Whereas if you leave them alone, they'll unravel themselves and they'll climb down, because they know children have seem to have an inbuilt understanding, most of them, of the dangers, and they'll go as far as they know they can cope with. So a child climbing the highest ladder in school, for example, we don't push them to go to the top. We ask them, if they've gone as far as they can, to go one more rung up the ladder and then come down. So how do we encourage them to just do that little step further? Is it has to be unique for your child, but it can't be at a compromise of their safety. So the example that I gave previously is, there were two videos of children cycling a bike. The first one, a child fell off, looked at the parent. The parent looked horrified the child had fallen off the bike and rushed over the child, picked them up. The child burst into tears. They did lots of telling off of the ground for being a naughty piece of ground. The child didn't go back on the bike. Another child cycled, fell off the bike. The parent looked over, said, "You're okay, darling. Up you get, rub your knee," and then carried on chatting with their friends. That is about saying to the child, you can do this yourself. It didn't need at that moment to go over. You'll know as parents when the cry turns into a distress cry or I think I'm a bit embarrassed cry. Again, no, there's no easy answer, but where in your own lives, how do you get your child to do the next rung of the ladder and then go back down? Because then when they get to the next rung of the ladder, they can go further on.
That's brilliant, James. Thank you. I have a question, but I'll wait till the next break. So carry on.
Right. So what do we want society to be like? Well, increasingly, the academics talk about a post-human world. A post-human doesn't mean there's no longer any humans, but it's reframing where humans are in the ecology of the world. Rather than being at the top of the triangle where, typically man at the top, then woman is second, and all the animals beneath that. That is such a model that is unhealthy and unhelpful and has put the world in a more complex position that we're living at the moment, to see the world as an ecosystem in which we are all interconnected in a much more equal way. So if you think your children being born today, they'll be retiring at the turn of the next century. It's quite, and within that 80 years or so, they probably won't have the same job for the whole career. It'll probably be, I think there are some people who say between 5 and 12 jobs in a lifetime. When I was growing up, you took one job, you took one profession and you went for it. But your children are going to be in a world where the jobs haven't yet been created that they'll be doing. So this question is, what do you want your children to be like when they're 40? It's one that I've asked many, many people. When I went to visit the great Avanti schools in the southwest of England, we asked that question of them. So what do you want your children to be like when they're 40? If we have some mood music, have a quick think, and maybe on the chat, share with Kush. Kush, are any words coming up?
Not at the on your screen.
No, on the chat. Is anyone suggesting what they want their children to be like when they're 40?
Not at the moment. Looks like they're being shy, or they haven't thought about it before.
I'll just share some of the ones that I've seen before, and some of these will probably resonate with you. So children who are, people who are open-minded, who are tolerant, interested in other ways of living, who are friendship makers, who can master concepts, who are reflective, who are resilient, solution-focused. A society, for your 40-year-old son, Kush, who's happy, polite, respectful, independent, questioning, learning that it's about effort. You have to put effort into things to make them better. Who's excited about life. So these are a collation of, I've asked this question to hundreds of parents and hundreds of teachers, and this is the kind of collation of that question. Parents want their children to be happy, essentially, and there's a problem with happiness, is that, as Charlie Brown says, I think I'm afraid to be happy because whenever I get too happy, something bad always happens. We can't stop bad things happening in life, and we can't stop children being unhappy. So the question is, we can't make children happy, we can't make a society happy. It seems obvious, but how do we help children understand how to manage when things are difficult? So for example, during this COVID pandemic lockdown, are we modeling to the children how to cope with a crisis in the most positive way? Because they'll probably leave not remembering COVID, they'll remember how they felt about it. So how do we model to children, share with them, when it's difficult in life and when you're struggling, it's okay, but you can do that by having a society with good people. You make friendships, you can access resources to help get through the more difficult things in life.
James, we just had a few come through. So I just found out there's a 1 minute lag between us and what the public are seeing.
Okay.
So we've got integrity, happy in their purpose, wanting to inspire others.
Great, lovely. I'll add those to my list. Inspiring others, people who have got the ability to inspire. So they have to be excited about the world around them. They have to be able to question. They have to find creative ways to respond to the world they live in, to be inspiring. Thank you, whoever contributed. So I think an important thing, families are very diverse. As parenting is diverse, there's not one model. There is the stereotype mum, dad, 2 children, 2.4 children, but families are very diverse, and I think it's important to, one of the most important things is to have a united front as a parent, as a single parent, or as parents with two people in a family unit. is to have real consistency and clarity about what you're wanting. And because of the complexity, it's important to find common ground and united front. So these questions, what are your values as a couple or as an individual? Have you really reflected on what are the core values for yourself? And you write them down and share them in a creative way, print them off, put them on your fridge. Those are the values that seem to be coming up more and more that parents want their children to be like, as well as the kind of job they want them to do. But you can't really control the kind of job they want to do. You can control and you can kind of influence how they are developing values. So what are your values as parents? If you write them down and create something that goes on your fridge or around your house. As a couple, if there is a couple in a parenting unit, a family unit, or whatever the family unit is, what are your expectations for your child? As soon as a child knows there's a difference of expectation, they will play you off each other, as they would do in a school. I remember in a class of 2 teachers, they would play me off the teaching assistant and see who would get the answer that they wanted. Don't underestimate children. So, children are very cute and cuddly, but they can do many more things than we often give them credit for. And how do you help them self-regulate? When we tell reception parents of reception children, the best thing they can do to help us is not necessarily teach them how to write their name, but teach them how to undress into PE kits, or do their shoelaces up, or do their coat up, or know that when it's cold outside, they should put a hat on. All those things are about learning to be an independent person. And obviously parents love it when they're young and they can pick them up and cuddle them and do all those things. But how do they start being independent, especially when they come to school? And when your boundaries are explained to a child, you stick to them. And you keep by doing that, you keep your children safe to explore if you stick to your boundaries and you've explained it to them. And a good place.
James.
Yeah.
After this slide, I've just got a couple of questions, okay?
Okay, well, it's a good place to stop. A good place to nurture compassionate relationships is to start with yourself, understanding what you need. And we'll move on after some questions.
Ready, James?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. You were talking about values, and then I just looked up on the website, the Avanti website, and something that struck me when I chose to put my son in the Avanti school, he's in the reception year, is the 3 values in the mission statement of Avanti. So educational excellence, character formation, spiritual insight. Would you like to shed any light on why you think they're so integral, like so essential?
In my view, Kush, those aren't necessarily values. They are visionary statements about what an education it should be for young people or for the world, and that includes, as well as educational excellence, academic. I think Avanti chose the word educational rather than academic, saying that education in all aspects of life should be excellent, not just
right.
math, science, geography, and history. So educational excellence, character formation, and which has the values within it. And I think the Avanti values are empathy, respect, integrity,
courage,
respect,
self-discipline. Yeah.
Self-discipline, number 6. Those are the values to develop character formation. And then spiritual insight is about nurturing the sense of spiritual identity. Now, you could link those with mind, body, and soul, perhaps.
Right.
That there's a balance is required in each. There needs to be a balance to live an enriched, fulfilling life. You need a balance. I think Delia Smith, the famous chef, says you can have a little bit of what you like is good. You don't need to abandon chocolate, though. My stomach in lockdown is not good for chocolate. But a little bit. The balance is important to nurture.
Right.
Because I think if you purely focus on academic, then you'll have people who don't understand how to connect with themselves or with others in the same way that you could do if you're nurturing those 3 aspects. So for me, those aren't the values. They're more like the mission of what a quality education is. The values in self-discipline and those 6 that we spoke about.
Perfect. I've got another question here. Let me just find it. So earlier you gave the triangle of was it victim, I'm blameless, the child at the bottom. On the top left was the persecutor, and on the top right was the rescuer.
Yeah.
And I see that play out a lot at my home, both when I was a child and now as a parent, a good cop, bad cop type of framework. When there's a challenge for a kid and the parent identifies there needs to be an improvement, but there's two parents.
Yeah.
But they have different views. How can they reconcile or negotiate to get the best for the kid? And in particular for you as a head teacher, when there's two teachers that think, oh, this kid needs this, but they have different views, how can, it's not so much conflict resolution, but how can there be a negotiation get what's best for the kid?
Well, I think that goes back to what are your, if there are two people in a parenting relationship, what are the shared values that are your non-negotiable? Because if you go back to those, 3, 5, whatever it may be, if those values are very clear, the rest is interpretation, which requires discussion about what is enough. Now, parents have a huge emotional attachment to their children, whereas teachers, though we love and care for your children, we don't have the same, because we're not the parents of your children. We don't have the same invested interests as you do as parents. So in some ways, it's easier for schools to determine for all their community what is important, and we negotiate with parents who may not interpret the way that we've interpreted. So some of what I'm going to talk about in a minute is about feelings and needs, and this might be a technique, and it's only an introduction, and there's many other things, courses you can go on, but it may be a technique to try and nudge together for a shared understanding. I think the most important thing I can reflect back on is without clarity about what both parents have agreed on, the child will feel more uncertain and will then do what they think is right because they haven't got the clarity about what the boundaries are.
Yeah.
And and then I think what happens then is parents then become in victim because their child is doing it to them. You haven't tidied your bedroom again. You haven't eaten the food again. It all becomes about the parent and not about the child. And then the parent can go into victim quite easily. And then the child will easily go into persecutor, i.e. I'm not tidying my room. Or I'm going to say they might go to rescuer and try and solve the problem between the parents, which is not the place for them to be. Yeah,
true. I'll let you carry on. Thanks, James.
So how do we nurture our own, a compassionate relationship by going to self? I think listening, when we listen to people is one thing. Do we really hear what they're saying? There was a program on the radio as I was driving home today saying the guy has written a book about communication, and actually the main thing is not communicating, it's listening. If parents are watching this or others are watching this, if you're in a WhatsApp group or any WhatsApp communication, by the time you've texted your message, somebody else has already responded to what's going on in their head, and then you respond to what's going on in your head before they've communicated back. It's it's a social media miscommunication because no one's listening well enough because they're not hearing what the message is. So this brings to a technique, a different way of thinking about communicating called non-violent communication. It's designed by Marshall Rosenberg. It links with many of the Vedic principles of relationship making. Now, Marshall Rosenberg came up with these two animals. The jackal is the judgment language. Jackals kind of chatter a lot. They bark at each other. So we all have a jackal in our head. And we judge ourselves, first of all. We're not good enough. I'm not a good enough teacher or a good enough head teacher. I'm not, there's that language, today they'll find out that I don't know what I'm doing is the imposter syndrome jackal. The giraffe, he used the giraffe because giraffes have the biggest heart in the mammal kingdom. And they have, their necks are the tallest because they can transcend what's going on in the reality to look slightly different. It's about stepping back. So the giraffe language is about stepping back. So here's two examples of that jackal language. Imagine somebody's just come into your office and they walk past you, the jackal would say, he's so rude. So making a very clear judgment. He's so rude. The giraffe would say, when I said hello, he looked in another direction. There's a slight shift in reality that the giraffe is making an observation. They're not making a judgment. If you look at the second example, Mr. Abraham is not at all able to manage his team. That is a judgment. The jackal is judging Mr. Abraham. The giraffe language would say, Mr. Abraham has explained the new strategy and has been interrupted several times by different people. It's a shift in the language that says, I'm observing something. So in relation to children, if a child is pushing boundaries, are we going to make a judgment saying they are being defiant? Or are we going to say, I notice that you want more chocolate, or I notice that you want to have more time playing Lego? How do we frame the language? Because judgment language is always comes back with more judgment language or defensive language. So the Marshall-Rosenberg nonviolent communication assumes a number of things. The overarching one is that all humans want to meet somebody else's need. Another assumption that we all have feelings and we all have needs. And this is really important to identify the feelings and needs. So a question is, feelings arise when a need is met or not met. So if you're feeling bored because you're listening to me jabber on, your need for some new ideas or your need for greater connection with other parents has not been met. Or if you're feeling bored, your need for being in the sunshine is not being met. If you're feeling enthusiastic and excited about listening to me, then your need for new ideas or your need for relief that you are a good enough parent has been met. So feelings arise when needs are met or unmet. So if you can write a list of human feelings. These might be happy, sad. Those are what children would say. You could expand that to other human feelings. The feeling of disappointment, enthusiastic. There's so many feelings. And then the more difficult thing is to look at a list of human needs. Now we can start off with saying you need food. A baby needs food, sleep, water or milk. It needs care. It needs love and affection. There's many more human needs. The need for, parents need peace at the end of the day after they've been working all day. They might need for a sense of order in their house. So looking at feelings and needs changes the language from judgment to exploring, as I said, the sense of feelings and needs. So this is how it's structured really. It's about observing. So you make an observation, first of all, observing how you feel about something, listening to the judgments, then you connect with a feeling and you connect with a need. So why am I feeling like this? It's because I need something. And then when you've done that internal work, you can then express the observation, including the feeling and the need. And you can request somebody to meet that need. It's very difficult because we have grown up in cultures of judgment. Our school systems are based on judgment. But how do we move beyond that to try and make it better for everyone? So this is a model. If you start at the bottom, and there's a couple of examples I could share with you. So imagine your child has not tidied the lounge of their toys and you've asked about 200 times. You could say, they're just badly behaved and won't listen to me, which would be a jackal. So if we go down to listen to your jackal, I'm really annoyed. They're really badly behaved children. They don't listen to us. You listen to all that jackal. And then you try to work out what is it that I'm feeling. So you might be feeling really exhausted after a day and you're feeling really exhausted because what is the need? You need to think about the need. So I'm noticing my child hasn't picked up their Lego. I'm feeling really annoyed. because I really need some order after a long day's work. Now you can go straight, then you need to find a way of requesting that. You could say something like this, I notice I notice the Lego's still in the lounge. I'm feeling really tired after a long day. I really need some space in the lounge so that we can all relax together. It takes much longer, and the child may come back saying, no, I need to play. And then there lies the battle, is that the child also has needs, which may not be the same need as you have. But this process I've seen over and over again create better relationship making, and you can go on courses about feelings and needs, and I would highly recommend them. And if you live in London, there are many non-violent communication experts who will be able to deliver courses for you. But rather than going at it, you're not listening to me, you're not tidying up, which will end up in more complex, difficult end of the day, kind of an unsavory atmosphere maybe. This is about trying to connect with your own feelings and needs, and then saying, I notice you really want to play more Lego. You must be feeling really excited about building the Lego because you really need some playtime. So what we're going to do, could we just tidy up now? And then after we've had dinner, we'll play together. And then what you've done is created an opportunity for a child to meet your need of connection, but also for them to meet your need of tidying up the space. So it is a complex way, but it's worked really well in schools. I just share one example of a boy who I worked with who had a tricky home life, and he would often get very angry at school during playtime, and would come to my office and would essentially throw everything around off my desk, throw the bin around, and my room was ended up in a disheveled way. And I would say to him, "Oh, what's wrong?" And he would not talk for an hour. It would take about an hour and a half to him to de-escalate. And then I went on a non-violent communication course, and I began to change my language. And that's why I'm really emphasizing the importance of language. And when he came and I'd done this course, rather than saying what's wrong, which I realized was negating all his feelings and all his need, I said, I can see you really cross. I'm really interested to know what's happened. And just by saying, I can see you really cross, acknowledge the human feeling and that he was needing something. Within a few minutes, he'd sat down and we were in a conversation about the unfairness of football. It's always about football in schools, typically. And it was about the change of language. So when an adult changes themselves and how they communicate, children can change, is what I would say is the key learning for me in that context. When a child wants to spend longer playing games online, you might go for, I'm feeling really anxious because I really need them to go to sleep. I'm feeling anxious because I need my child to be fit and ready for tomorrow. There's a way, rather than saying you need to go to bed, turn it off and take away the console, is to find a way of requesting because you're expressing your feeling and need. A way that we use in school, a therapeutic approach, is we reduce the language also. We say if a child is displaying antisocial behavior, we would say, or is escalating, or is in crisis, we would say, I can see that, and then we'd acknowledge what we're seeing, and then saying something like, I'm here to help, or I'd like to understand, and then say, you talk, I'll listen, and then you pause. That has really helped us and enabled children to talk more about what's going on for them, rather than saying, you need to tidy up what you've done, or you shouldn't be angry, or why did you do that, and asking lots of questions. I can see that you're upset. I'm here to help, or I'd like to understand. You talk, I'll listen. And when that's genuinely said, it can't be done. You have to do it in a genuine way. You can't say it. I can see that you're angry. It needs to be done in a way that children know that you actually are here to listen to them. So it's complex when you've got imagine you've got lots of people in a room, they've all got feelings and needs going on. And the technique is to try and find ways to connect in a more compassionate way. So to nurture compassionate relationships, start with yourself and define what matters to you. What are your values and how do you live them each day? And I would really strongly encourage you writing them down, because you'll be able to synthesize what really matters for you. Write a list of feelings and needs and start using them in the language with children, because you'll be teaching children about feelings and needs in doing that. Consider which judgments you use for yourself. How do you judge yourself as an individual, and what are you using, what language are you using to express for your children? Always begin with an observation, and remember, especially in this pandemic time, to be kind to yourself and to each other, because we don't really know what suffering or experiences other people are going through, and everything is a manifestation of a met or unmet need. I shall leave with you tonight, if we have any questions. This is an amazing book called The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse. And Charlie McCasey said I could use this image. I wonder if there is a school of unlearning. Rather than watching that Channel 4 program about what best parent is, if we can start unlearning and relearning based on what the children in front of us are needing and how they're presenting their behaviours, we might be able to nudge closer towards kind of more compassionate relationships. Another thing to leave you with is there are lots and lots of lovely picture books that you can find, and other books that show the values. And if you can find those and talk and read them to your children and talk about them, then that's another way of modeling to children what the values are. So I would advocate a school of unlearning for us all. Thanks,
James,
you.
Absolutely fantastic. All in the space of an hour. I mean, I'm very, very impressed. I was taking pictures of your slides, especially the slide of non-violent communication. I once came across a quote, which is always stuck with me. Life is all about relationships, and relationships are all about communication.
Yeah.
So if we can communicate effectively and with compassion, then the relationship falls into place, and then generally the well-being and our life falls into place around that. So thank you for decoding this very complex matter of trying to do the best for our kids. I like this slide here. I wonder if there's a school of unlearning. I remember going to a tabla is an Indian percussion instrument. And I remember going to a teacher when I was young, and I said, "Oh, I already know how to play something." He said, "Okay, it's going to take you double the time to teach you, because I'm going to have to spend the first half unlearning everything you've learned so that I can teach you properly." And I think even with parenting, with every aspect in life, we have to unlearn. And that's the challenge that we have now, James, is that we have WhatsApp forwards, Instagram, constant bombardment of information, maybe information overload, and our parents didn't have any information other than what their parents told them. So finding that balance of making use, this is a question for you, how do we find that balance of taking advantage of all the information, yet kind of listening to our inner voice?
Well, no researcher knows your children like you do. That's the first point. And there is also, I think there's an intuitive wisdom in people about how to respond to children. I think the trouble is, as you said, the social media and the countless, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, muddies the waters. It's like white noise when you're just trying to do your very best. As I said at the beginning, no one wakes up saying, I'm going to try my worst today as a parent. They just have to struggle with what your child brings up for you. And I think all parents are either battling against what their parents did for them, or they're trying to copy what their parents did in a new context with social media and consoles and everything else like that. So there's no easy answer. It's the most complex job being a parent. It's more difficult than being a teacher. Teaching is tricky enough as it is, but being a parent is a lifelong task. And my mum, who's I haven't seen for a long time now because of lockdown, she said she the biggest thing she had to learn was to let us go as soon as we felt we could fly, because if she didn't do that, we wouldn't fly back. And so, you know, I think I shocked her when I said I'm going to go and live in Nepal for a year, because it was like outside her comfort zone. But she said, if I didn't encourage you to go, even though I didn't want you to go, you would never have come back. And our relationship is a really loving, strong one. It always has been, but it's even more strengthened because of her courage to let go. So the wisdom of grannies and grandparents is also important. You know, with every piece of research, there's a counter piece of research.
James, can you hear me?
Yeah. I can hear you.
I think Kushal's signal is gone.
Okay.
Thank you so much, James. That was an amazing session.
Pleasure. I hope it was better than the being in the garden having a water fight.
Yeah,
I think it was. Apologise and go and do that now because the sun's still out.
It was fantastic. And Kushal, if you could just end with a summary or just a closing message.
Sure. I think the messages I've taken back from James's reflections and research is that we have to consider and try and learn this non-violent communication. I really love the fact that it's patients' feelings and needs. The principle of working together with schools and the teachers. I like that thing of not worrying so much about what the teachers are doing, but doing the things that will help the teachers, teaching them to tie their shoelaces, put their hats on, wash their hands and things like that. I'm very keen on trying to dive in and learn a bit more about this book, about unlearning.
Oh, yeah, it's gone.
Yeah. So I think we're going to close. Thank you so much, James.
Thank you very much, everyone. Look after yourselves. I hope you and your families are well.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, James. Well done.
Bye-bye.
Bye.